for me, it was difficult, probably in the same way that it is for a lot of men, and that I don't like to be appear weak to anyone. Like
Yeah.
I'm more aware of that than I need to be. So I'm paranoid that asking for help is admitting weakness in some way, rather than understanding it as a sign of strength and a sign of courage. Those questions helped me because they kind of forced me to be a little bit more objective. And my wife, honestly, would regularly ask me some of these questions, and I think taking some time for a little self assessment. We all need to do that. One of the questions I have on there that was, convicting to me is, can you tell me the names of your child's teachers?
It's just so easy for a mom. Mom's
Right.
like, "I could nail that one."
Yeah, and I was convicted of that. I'm like, okay, well, I know what grade they're in, and I know where they go to school, but I don't know the names of their teachers. But I
Mm,
want to be a kind of dad that knows the names of their teachers, right?
yeah,
And so I think having some objective questions can help. I think the encouragement can help. One of the things that my wife did was she encouraged through some of our mutual couple friends. She encouraged the husbands to encourage me, and not in a way that was critical of me, but
yeah.
in a way that, hey, it's really, Kyle's going through a lot right now at work, pretty demanding time. If you guys can just go have some fun with him, I know he would appreciate it. But that let them know, that let some of my guy friends know
Yeah,
that I was worn out without my wife going to them and saying he's worn out. And
yeah,
and so that was important, I think, to have some of those guys come and encourage me. And then, I'm in a men's group where we will share some of those things a little bit more freely at church. And that helps a lot as well, meaning that some of the men can really challenge me in ways that it would be hard for my wife to do. Like I want her to do that as well, but it helps when there are some men's voices around me doing that.
it's, like, received differently. It feels different.
It does. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it does. And for her, during that season, for me, when I was especially worn out, her encouragement to me was uniquely powerful.
mm,
And, I think it is always easy to underestimate that, because as a husband, I might not express that as clearly as I should about how much it means to me. But I would say, for most husbands, it means a lot more to them than they sometimes will let you know.
yeah, like, that
And
we can't tell, but we should keep doing it.
yeah, and listen, husbands need to do better at saying it. Like this really does make a difference. But it is true. Like I could get encouragement from 100 people,
Mhm,
and it would mean nothing to me compared to how much a note from my wife would
mhm.
mean to me. And so, I'm learning to better express how much that means,
Yeah.
and express that those are needs, but that's still not something that's very natural for me, or I think for a lot of men.
That's such a good reminder. I remember talking to David Jeremiah, and he was saying, like, 1,000 people could tell me I did a great job with that message or whatever, but if my wife just says one word about it in praise, that's what I will really listen to, and that's what really means a lot to me. So that makes a lot of sense. There was something early in your book that I found so interesting, and if you could help us explain what a controlling metaphor was, because it really, I think, in parenting, we can have these controlling metaphors like, like it's a battle or it's a whatever. Could you kind of explain that? Because I thought that was a real eye opener.
Yeah, the in scripture, metaphor is really powerful. We see it throughout the Old Testament and how God is understood in the Gospel of John. When Jesus is helping us understand who he is, he constantly uses metaphor like bread of life, light of the world, and the church, a city on a hill, and lots of metaphors that help us unlock identity. And the controlling metaphor is one that you can filter decisions through. You can look at and say, okay, here are my priorities. It is more all encompassing. And so, the way I talk about this in the book is in marriage counseling. I have a friend of mine who's a marriage counselor, and he talks about how couples often need a new controlling metaphor, that they'll use language that is more war and battle, and this is likely true in parenting as well, where you're on the attack and this person's defensive and they're going at it, and it's language that is war metaphor. And he just talks about there's power if you can change that language, if you can look at it through a different lens. And so he'll teach people to use like a dance metaphor, like who's going to take the lead, and hey, are we stepping on each other's toes, and the rhythm that we're moving to, are we moving at the same rhythm? And by just, it sounds perhaps not that significant, but when you start listening to the language that you use, it begins to become clear how you're seeing a relationship or a responsibility, and just changing that language can change how you feel about your role as a parent or as a spouse, and it changes how they feel about you. And so I think it's a very biblical concept, and it's a helpful way to shift and make some changes.
It's helping us, like, have the mind of Christ. Like, it's so much better to think of, "Oh, we are dancing," versus "We are at war," and it is, I think, a really, really clever shift. Your book is based off of what the Lord is saying in John chapter 15, and that metaphor of the vine and the branches, and so much of it is about things aren't working because we've got that role switched. Like, I'm no longer the branch, I am the vine, you
Yeah.
know? So talk a little bit about that, like, just when things aren't working for us, how is it helpful to go back to John 15?
Yeah. So in John 15, it's some of the final words of Jesus to his closest followers, where he knows he doesn't have much time left here on earth. And he is walking with them along the streets of Jerusalem towards the Garden of Gethsemane. And there are, along that road, these vines and branches. And Jesus says to his followers in John 15, verse 5, "I'm the vine, you're the branches. If you remain in me and I remain in you, you'll bear much fruit. But apart from me, you can't do anything." And the idea here is that you can't produce good fruit out of your own strength, out of your own determination. You can't produce eternal fruit just because that's what you're going after. Like, the emphasis is so often on production, but if we keep our priority on connection, remaining in him, then we'll bear much fruit. And so, as a parent, I have 4 kids. My youngest is 18 now. My oldest 3 daughters they're all in their 20s.
Mm,
And I know that the emphasis is often on production, right? Like, that's what we tend to prioritize, partly out of fear. We want to make sure that they're ready. We want to make sure that they can take care of themselves. That when they are when they are set free and independent, that
yeah,
they know how to produce. And so a lot of our parenting efforts can be around production. I think that's what we
yeah.
often reward is production, meaning if you bring home the right kind of grades, and if you excel athletically,
Mhm.
if you get your room clean, finish your chores, and all of those things are worth rewarding. It's not that we shouldn't celebrate those things, but the connection is more important than the production. That
Mm,
if we can make sure that our kids are closely connected to Jesus, that production will come. But if the priority is on production, it can lead to a lot of pressure. It can lead to feeling worn out, tired. And that's what we want to model as parents too. We want to model that it's connection and then production. I think one of the challenges for me, and as my kids were growing up, was um, my rhythms didn't always reflect production or reflect connection. They reflected production,
mhm.
just the pace in which I ran, and always saying things like, well, it's a busy season when things slow down. um, Talking about how much we expect them to prioritize family dinners and
Yeah,
meals, but
right.
hey, if I'm late because I had something important come up at work. And so wanting to model connection ahead of production, wanting to model it in such a way that when they wake up and they see their mama with a robe on, a cup of coffee, and a devotional in her lap as they are getting ready for school in the morning, it's not saying anything, but it's letting them know, hey, connection comes first, and
Yeah.
then production.